I'm Grant Hollaway with the Victorian Government based at Horsham. For the last few days we've been delivering workshops to agronomists on the control of Septoria of wheat. Now, Septoria tritici blotch is an important fungal foliar disease of wheat. It has been an important disease of wheat in Victoria before, but particularly over the last 5 years in our higher rainfall regions in both South Australia, Victoria and Tasmania, this has become the predominant disease of wheat crops in these regions. So for people to see whether they've got Septoria in their paddocks, it's really important to walk through the paddocks of wheat and look low down in the canopy. Often the disease will be present first on the older leaves, so it's really important to get down and look at those lower leaves. What we're looking for there is lesions on the leaves that have black dots with them. Often there'll be a yellow margin around the lesion, but the black dots within the lesions are the key identifying factor that it's Septoria tritici. There's some important aspects that we need to keep in mind when we're thinking about managing Septoria. The first is really looking at the life cycle and understanding that it is a stubble-borne disease. So that's where our primary inoculum's coming from to infect new crops, is coming off infected stubble. And the spores that come off that stubble is wind-borne and can cover large distances across a region. So even though your paddock of wheat may not be sown into infected stubble, the crop is still at risk of getting infected from wind-blown spores coming from across the region. These spores are typically released early in the growing season, so time of sowing can be an important part of the management. Early sown crops are going to be at more risk from Septoria tritici blotch. The next part of the life cycle is once the young crop has become infected with the spores off the stubble is secondary infection, which happens when we get wet weather, and this can happen multiple times during the season. But the critical part for Septoria outbreak is continual wet leaf area. So leaves need to be wet or have high humidity, 98% plus, for 48 hours straight. And the more often that happens during a season, the more times that the life cycle will complete itself and the more leaf area damage that we will get. The challenge for Septoria tritici blotch control is that it is a very difficult disease to control. A lot of this is attributed to the fact that the pathogen is highly variable and is able to overcome the resistance genes that we deploy in our varieties, and we also have recent evidence that we're seeing strains of the fungus developing that are less sensitive to the fungicides as well. So it's very important that if we're going to manage this disease that we use all the methods that are available in an integrated approach. For a lot of foliar diseases we can use a single approach where we would deploy a resistant variety, and that can give complete control, or for some other diseases we use a fungicide on its own and that's enough. But for Septoria tritici it is much harder to control this disease, so we need to use everything that we can to minimise the impacts of this disease on production. And ideally we need to keep the levels of inoculum down in our wheat growing areas as low as possible. So things that farmers need to do is select the most resistant variety that they're able to do in their cropping system, and that they would be looking at a recent cereal disease guide to understand how their varieties are performing to this disease. Thinking about time of sowing, the earlier sown a crop is, the more at risk it will be from Septoria. So particularly be careful when sowing susceptible varieties earlier. If possible, you plant your more resistant varieties earlier in the cropping program. Then the next part of it is really timely applications of fungicides and understanding what fungicides are available by speaking with your agronomist and getting these applied in a timely fashion. What we don't want to do is let the epidemic get away and then try and pull it up with fungicide use. And to make sure that we maintain the effectiveness of our fungicides for as long as possible, we really want to not repeatedly use the same active ingredient in a crop, and also not unnecessarily use our chemicals. So scouting is very important to see that a crop really warrants a fungicide application.